The hypertension is very common. Most up to half adults now have hypertension. So it's something that everybody's facing. The thing about hypertension, though, it doesn't really have symptoms for the most part. It's a, quote, silent killer.
Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Robert Lufkin. He has expertise and patents in some cases at the intersection of AI and medicine, blockchain technologies and medicine, and most recently, his published book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, How Conventional Medicine is Making You Sicker and What You Can Do to Save Your Life. Many people become health and wellness evangelists because of a pain to passion story that develops into an expertise worth sharing. That sharing driven by the passion to help others. Dr. Lufkin has the pain to passion piece, having quoted the reason he made the changes in his life was because he loved his children more than he believed in the message traditional medicine gave him, having been diagnosed with not 3, but 4 chronic diseases of aging.
There's an epidemic of these so-called chronic diseases. Half of adults are now obese or overweight. Alzheimer's disease, even mental illness is exploding. The problem is...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. Our next guest I met at a biohacking conference. The title of his talk both caught me off guard and resonated with me completely. Before I get into that title, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Robert Lufkin. Many people become health and wellness evangelists because of a pain to passion story that develops into an expertise worth sharing. That sharing driven by the passion to help others. Dr. Lufkin has the pain to passion piece, having quoted the reason he made the changes in his life was because he, and I'm going to paraphrase here, I may be throwing some of his quotes together, but he loved his children more than he believed in the message traditional medicine gave him, having been diagnosed with not 3, but 4 chronic diseases of aging. Additionally, the expertise was already in place. The problem was that it was traditional medical expertise he was teaching to medical students as a professor at UCLA and USC that wrote the doomsday prescription he refused to accept. He has expertise and patents in some cases at the intersection of AI and medicine, blockchain technologies and medicine, and most recently, his published book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, How Conventional Medicine is Making You Sicker and What You Can Do to Save Your Life. By the way, that is an Amazon top seller right now. It just displaced Huberman's book, so this is the thing that you need to be reading. Today, you just may learn an easy way and easy changes you can make to save your life from many of the chronic diseases associated with aging. Dr. Lufkin, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Chris, I'm a fan of your work in this podcast, so it's a real honor and pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So I want to jump right in, kind of doing my background research. Your mother was a dietitian, so you grew up thinking about health and wellness and, of course, eating, well, we'll do air quotes, the right way, right? Pursuing medicine is a long endeavor, like 4 years in undergraduate, 4 years in med school, 3 to 7 years in residency. Did you know when you went into your undergrad program that you were going to pursue medicine? And what in your background drove you to ultimately pursue a discipline with such a long path of study?
Yeah, like you say, my mom was a practicing clinical dietitian. She went to the hospital every day, and dietitian's job is to manage nutrition. And so I was raised with the idea that nutrition was important and it could affect our health, and I think it just rubbed off on me, and I always was curious about the human body and all these things. So I was always thinking about medical school or biology and that kind of thing. So it was kind of a lifelong goal and a dream for me to follow through on it. And I was fortunate to be able to take that career path. So I was so happy for that.
You say fortunate. I think what I'm actually hearing is hardworking, right? because there's hard work and getting like the grades, unless you're, there are a few of those kind of geniuses who don't really study and know everything, and they just irritate the rest of us. You have some, and maybe you're that one. Was it hard work for you? Was it relatively easy? Because that's a legitimate question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it is hard work, but I always find if it's something I'm passionate about that I really love, it's fun, and so pick things that you love doing, and it's the work's not as hard as it seems.
Yeah. Do work to make sure that your work is something you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. I love that kind of mindset. So you have some credibility at the intersection of blockchain technology in medicine, AI in medicine. This is in addition to patents related to radiology. You probably could be very successful pursuing those very unique disciplines. Are those still on your radar, or are you very specifically focused on getting the message out about metabolic health to the general public?
Yeah, most of my career was in medical imaging, the papers I published, the research I did, the majority of it was. And then later on, we transitioned into AI and medical imaging. But the last 10 years really has focused on getting this message out. It was so transformative for my own life, and I saw the good it did to me, and then I see around me so many people that are still suffering with these diseases, and they're making the same mistakes that I made that got me there. And most of them are not aware of the possibilities for change with lifestyle and other approaches to them. So that's my mission now, is to get this message out, and that's the idea for the book. And I'm enjoying this podcast with you as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the book. When did you decide to write it? Like, what was this? You've written lots of papers. Writing a book is, I think, very different than writing a medical paper. Where did that genesis come from? Maybe there were relationships that put that all together.
Yeah, well, as you've hinted at, I'm really the medical establishment. I'm not an outsider. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've written hundreds of peer-reviewed papers. I've gotten millions of dollars to my lab from the drug companies and device makers and the federal government, NIH, to do research. And in the process, I've also written many books. I have over a dozen textbooks that are, translated in 6 languages. But writing a textbook was very different, because basically nobody reads a textbook other than, very specialized people. So this book was something new for me, because it's not aimed at specialists, although it's heavily referenced. So if experts want to look at it, they can see the thought process. But it's aimed at kind of everyday people. So it's profusely illustrated with what hopefully is an understandable, straightforward approach to these concepts that can really be life-changing, as they were for me.
Yeah, I think I remember it was either early on in the book, your introduction probably, you very graciously said, any valuable information is probably from the shoulders of the people I'm standing on, and any good prose is because of my co-author. Talk about how you connected with your co-author and how that gelled into this book.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Phil Ovadia, is a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he had a similar come-to moment with his own metabolic health, and he published a wonderful book called "Stay Off My Operating Table," where he tries to teach people how to avoid heart disease through similar metabolic health models that I use. But anyway, he engaged a co-author that helped him. His name is Joshua Lissick, and he's an amazing guy. And the way Joshua helped me is I I'm used to communicating complex concepts to experts, and I wanted to be sure that I didn't just write another textbook that was, unreadable and only for experts who are, in the field. So Joshua provided kind of that everyman viewpoint. Sort of, he brought the prose down to or up to where everybody could understand it, and I'm really thankful for him to that. He writes beautifully, and anything good in my book is from him.
I like that. I love the humbleness that is in that. When you write a book, The Lies I Taught in Medical School, you're kind of inviting some of the establishment to have, we'll say to have debate, but that's probably that's a kind of less of what you're expecting. Have you had any of these kind of interviews or conflicts? I've seen, I think Dr. Gundry has some, out there ideas. Are any of your ideas out there far enough that you've had people, on social media with any credentials that you would admire or that have kind of come after you?
Well, there's always a difference of opinion, and from my colleagues and most of the people, the sort of the healthcare professionals, I mean, I think reasonable people can agree to disagree, and these are certainly not my ideas. This is not something I invented or came up with. This is just me looking at other people's work, looking at the scientific body of evidence, which, I include in my book for those who want to do it, like I said. And then it's how I interpret those findings. And, reasonable people can look at those same findings and interpret them differently. But so far, the response has been gracious for the most part, and collegial. Social media, a little bit less so. I was never much involved with social media, so this is like it's a new world, but it's a wonderful world. I'm excited about it, and people are very frank on social media and have very strong opinions. But it's great to hear those voices, because sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, that's a good point. We can all learn. I never stop learning, and that's the whole point of the book, that the lies, that's the nature of scientific investigation, and especially medical investigation. Anyone who's familiar with it, I think, will accept that there are lies being told, and we just need to refine our models of reality to have fewer lies.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, there's different opinions come up, and they're very frank about their opinions. What I have found is when you respond extremely measured, the tendency is to, just the fact that you bothered to respond to some snarky remark, is that they'll really oh, I didn't mean offense. It's like, well, you kind of seemed to. but it's to be measured, and really, I used to do comedy improv, and the number one rule of comedy improv is called yes and so when you take whatever they have and you say, you don't go but, right? You don't just deny it and try and prove the opposite. You say yes and how can you incorporate their own concepts into your response? You just get phenomenal results. I actually kind of enjoy that process of like flipping people. Hopefully no one hears this and then the whole crew is coming after me now.
I could definitely see you doing comedy improv. I would love to see your show. I could feel the energy, kind of that nimbleness and playfulness in your spirit.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was such a mental break, because when you're on stage doing improv, you cannot think of anything else. You must only think about what the other person is saying, and that's really important. All right, let's get to why you wrote this book, right? And this is kind of prefaced. You ended up with kind of four classic diseases of aging, inflammation. How did you first know that was happening? What does that look like as you're kind of going through your day-to-day life? Hey, I probably should visit a specialist. What does that look like? And then ultimately, what were you diagnosed with?
Yeah, the diseases came on. Interestingly enough, these four diseases came on over a short period of time. So it seemed like, oh, well, I got one thing and then something else and something else. It almost kind of cascaded. And the fact that four came together really made me question the whole thing. But the symptoms for the diseases are very different. And even when I was diagnosed with them, the doctors told me these are 4 different diseases, and we're going to give you 4 different drugs, and they're not really related for the most part. And that's one of the fundamental flaws that I wasn't aware of at the time, and many of my colleagues are still not aware of, and that they share this underlying metabolic principle. But to your question, the symptoms were varied. One was a type of arthritis, so I had extreme joint pain to the point I thought my foot was fractured. It hurt so bad I thought I'd fractured it, and but it turned out to be gout, which is an inflammatory arthritis, which frequently presents as people think they fractured their foot. So there was different symptoms. Another one was prediabetes, which is a glucose insulin regulation abnormality, which, how is that related to arthritis, and then there were the 2 other ones, which were also seemingly unrelated. And that was, so it wasn't like they all 3 hit and I go, wow, something is causing all 4. It was like, wow, I just got hit by a train, different ways. It was 4 different things that all kind of came at about the same time.
And then, so you mentioned gout, arthritic gout, prediabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia. What did hypertension present in one, did the prediabetes present in a certain way? Was that like, feeling faint, not having eaten, or what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, first of all, the hypertension is very common. Most up to half adults now have hypertension. So it's something that everybody's facing. The thing about hypertension, though, it doesn't really have symptoms for the most part. It's a, quote, silent killer. So the way that I was picked up with hypertension, most people are, is when they go to their doctor's office, they get their blood pressure checked. And it's really something to pay attention to. It's very serious, and you can do a lot of damage with hypertension before you get any symptoms. The damage can already be done. Similarly with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, elevation of the blood sugar, it can cause, frequent urination, or you may have hypoglycemia and thing. I actually didn't have any symptoms from that either, and it was something that was picked up from a lab test, just like the hypertension was. I was going to the doctors for these other things, and they go, wait a minute, you've got your blood pressure's high, and I don't like your glucose here. So,
yay! I'm so lucky. And how about the dyslipidemia?
Same thing. Yeah, it was
okay.
a lab test basically. Yeah.
And so the way you've described it, if each of these had happened even maybe a year and a half apart, you might have just said, oh, okay, that's just what happens. But because they all kind of happened and you were diagnosed in a tight time frame, a scientist goes, that's interesting. Like all 4 of these things happening in this tight time frame, the chances of them not being related have to be low. And so where did you take the story from there?
The other thing that bothered me was I was prescribed these prescription medicines, which, in the short term can be life-saving. And I was told, basically, you need to be on these for the rest of your life, so get used to it. I said, what about lifestyle?
How old were you at this time? I was
probably in my 40s, which is sort of middle age, and that's about when a lot of people start going off this metabolic cliff. In your 20s, the body's very forgiving, and you can eat whatever you want. You still have your 6-pack or whatever. You're thin, but very quickly after that, and this age is getting younger and younger all the time, where people are metabolically unfit. Then the things happen. The dad bod. We all know the various things, and we're now seeing, hypertension in their 40s. We're seeing prediabetes. It's going down to even younger, and teenagers are getting that. These other things, dyslipidemia, gout, are occurring at a much younger age. And some of the diseases we may talk about, that we talk about in the book, all the chronic diseases like cancer and all. Now there's an epidemic of cancer in young people, or colon cancer, which we didn't used to screen for it until people were in their 50s or so, and now they're 20 and 30-year-olds getting colon cancer. And so the whole thing. Well, I guess I should. This book is highly critical of Western medicine. I'm an insider on Western medicine. I want to go on the record and say I actually like Western medicine. I think it's transformed our lives in the 20th century. It through public health measures, infectious disease, it's made our lives so much better. And there were pills and surgeries that were developed that were really life-saving and transformative. And even today, if I get hit by a car out in front of my house, I want to have a blood transfusion. I want to have a splenectomy, and
you don't want to be on a low-carb diet.
Exactly. Although it may help me recover better, but if I'm dead, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
So we need life-saving. And I think the problem is, and what the book speaks to, is in the 21st century, there's an epidemic of these so-called chronic diseases that were present in the 20th century, but nothing like the 21st century. It's like a tsunami. It's taken off. Half of adults are now obese or overweight. Prediabetes or diabetes, it's approaching 50%. Hypertension, and we talked about cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, even mental illness is exploding. And I think the problem is when Western medicine takes what was so effective in the 20th century, the pills and the surgery, and applies them to these diseases like they did to me with the 4 that I had, they work. They can maybe save the life in the short term. They can be life-saving. Giving insulin for type 2 diabetic will save their life. But when we use it long term, they may mask the symptoms, and for many of the chronic complications, they don't do anything. Just like a stent for a heart attack may save my life from the heart attack, but it doesn't change my lifespan or change the underlying cardiovascular disease that continues even though the stent's in. And that's the challenge, I think, is that the pills, the medicine, in many cases don't work long term, and that's what I try and address in the book, because there is something that does work better than any pill or medicine, and it's something that is accessible to all of us.
So was there any aspect of, one of the criticisms of modern medicine is that each physician is very siloed, right? Like, so there is a cardiovascular expert, there may a diabetes expert. Did you bump into that, or did the one physician kind of pick up hypertension, dyslipidemia, and prediabetes, or did you have some of this where like maybe they weren't aware of the other things that were going on, or was that not the case?
Yeah, I think the generalists, the family medicine people, the internists are, by their nature, they're not as siloed. They have to deal with a little bit of everything, but they deal with everything on a more superficial level than, say, an endocrinologist who super specializes in one thing, or an arthritis, a rheumatologist expert who deals with arthritis, or orthopedist, and the idea that the joint pain I had that felt like a fracture was somehow related to my risk for Alzheimer's disease or even mental illness it's a big leap. But I think the evidence is very compelling that the same metabolic drivers that drive the arthritis I had will also drive mental illness. And that's really the whole theme of the whole book, that all these chronic diseases have a similar underlying mechanism. And the pills and surgery of Western medicine, for the most part, don't address it. They handle the symptoms. They may save lives in the short term. And I'm not advocating anyone stop their medicines that were prescribed by a doctor. This is serious stuff. You should only do it with your healthcare provider's participation. But I believe it's possible, and it was possible in my case, to decrease or even reverse the medicines. I was able to reverse all of them, stop all of them, and even the diseases in many cases can be slowed down, reversed, or decrease your risk for getting them later in life.
Yeah, I remember my mom was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. She got on a diet, and then it was done. Like everything was good. Her blood sugars sugar and insulin were in normal range. But then she just went back to eating what she was eating, and that could be, we might even get to touch on that because that's a mindset challenge. But it's fascinating because even in that moment, I was like, well, why are they prescribing you stuff if all you have to do is eat better, right? Like their prescription should be eat better. And I think I think in your book you had some sort of quote, if they defined it, if they called it a metabolic, right, or a meal issue, a diet issue, then it might get managed a different way.
Yeah, I mean, the perfect example is what your mom had and what I came down with and what most Americans are on the path to getting, which is type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance and an abnormality the way we respond to that. There are basically two ways to treat it. One way is you can manage it with drugs like metformin and then eventually insulin, and you can control the acute effects so that you don't die. And what the problem is, what papers have shown, and we talk about it in the book, is that the long-term effects of type 2 diabetes, when they're managed this way, continue to progress. What are those effects? Well, it's the number one cause of surgical amputations in our hospitals today is diabetes. It's the number one cause of renal failure and dialysis, a kidney failure. It's a high risk factor for cardiovascular disease, a high risk factor for cancer, mental illness. Alzheimer's disease is called type 3 diabetes for good reason, because of the metabolic nature of Alzheimer's and all. So that's what conventional medicine recommends. The American Diabetic Association, American Diabetes Association recommends diet like your mom had. You want sugar? Fine, and they have on their website, sugar cereals and this kind of thing, but they recommend just covering it with insulin. It's interesting, on the same page, they show the sponsor for that ad, and it's a company called DaVita Corporation, which is one of the largest dialysis makers or dialysis companies. And of course, the number one cause of dialysis is people who eat sugar cereals and develop type 2 diabetes. So that's one treatment for it. And then, like you say, the other treatment for type 2 diabetes, which is not, in my opinion, not promoted enough, is just stop eating carbohydrates, or lower your carbohydrates. And for most people, amazingly, most type 2 diabetics, if they start carbohydrates, not all, but majority of them will actually, their diabetes will not be controlled. It will actually reverse to the point that they don't need those medicines. And the difference is, when you control diabetes with insulin and metformin, you still get the downstream complications. It's a chronic progressive disease. It gets worse and worse and worse, and eventually kills you. When you treat type 2 diabetes with diet, you essentially reverse the diabetes. It goes into remission, and you don't need the medicines for the most part. And it's no longer a chronic progressive disease. You don't get renal failure, you don't get your foot amputated, and all those other things for the most part. So it's amazing that message isn't getting out there more to people.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Yeah, and I don't have your background, but just to have that one experience and think, well, this happened, and she fixed it with diet, but then she went back to a bad diet, this seems like a better way. All right, so you were diagnosed with these 4 chronic diseases of aging, and you did say the phrase, and I think I might have kind of mixed some stuff, but I love my children more. How bad was that scare, right? So now you've got these, and you're kind of mulling this over. Okay, I've got these, I don't know if anybody's kind of coined any phrase about this. You've got these forever prescriptions, right? That's the intent. Where is your mind going? How do you get to that next step? Who do you lean on to provide some guidance?
I knew enough about medicine. I knew enough about those diseases that it wasn't going to end well. Even with the prescriptions, these are chronic progressive diseases, and they can continue on. And I still have young children. They're still fairly young, and I wanted to be around for them. So I just began asking, is there any other way? And I turned, as it turns out, there was a great body of evidence that I was not aware of, and that many of my colleagues are still not aware of. I happened to be friends with Gary Taubes, who wrote one of the foundation books called Good Calories, Bad Calories, about it's one of the lies in my book. But Gary is a nutrition scientist, journalist, and then from there I went to, the many different articles by different people, and I realized that a lot has been figured out since my mom was telling me to, eat margarine instead of butter and have a low-fat diet, which is still the recommendations of many dietitians today. But I realized that by changing lifestyle, it might be possible to affect the diseases and that I had. So that's what I did. I began to change my lifestyle with the hope that I could, improve my chances of living to see my kids, children and grandchildren.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty compelling reason for change. So you're on these 4 medications, you're changing. What are some of the immediate things that you changed in your diet?
Yeah, well, with diet, and we go through a lot of these in the book, but the basic thing was, first thing I did, without changing what I eat, I just changed when I eat. My mom had told me that it's healthy to eat many small meals throughout the day. So, you divide up, eat 6 small meals. Well, there's really strong evidence that that's actually bad. It drives inflammation and ultimately, insulin resistance, all these other things that is the metabolic abnormalities that cause these chronic diseases. So the first thing I did was I stopped snacking after dinner, and then I stopped between meal snacks, and then I eventually skip breakfast, and now I skip lunch too, and I just have 1 meal a day when my kids come home from school. And for me, I've never felt better, and I believe it's a metabolically healthy way to do. You don't have to be that extreme though, just I would start with cutting out the snacks, and that may be enough. But then the other thing was I changed what I ate. I got rid of junk food. I'm a recovering junk food addict. I love junk food. I can't keep it in the house, and it's a challenge with teenagers because they fill the house with junk food. But I realize how harmful it is and how it can damage my body and cause these chronic diseases. And so I basically eliminated junk food. And junk food for me was really 3 things. And for most people, it's refined carbohydrates and sugars, which drive insulin resistance, drives inflammation, drives oxidation. So those things are bad for so many reasons. And carbohydrates, of course, most people don't know, are non-essential. Fat and proteins, the other 2 of the 3 macronutrients, are essential. We'll die without eating them. Carbohydrates, we don't need them to live, and actually they harm us when we spike our glucose with them. So carbohydrates and refined sugars, that includes things like starches and flour and bread and this kind of thing, because they convert into glucose almost immediately in the mouth. Second thing I eliminated was something called seed oils, which are industrial oils that were thought to be very healthy. And the American Heart Association, still on their website, says that these vegetable oils, as they're called, they don't have any vegetables in them at all. They're industrial oils, but they say the American Heart Association still says vegetable oils are heart healthy, and you should substitute butter and saturated fats with these heart healthy oils. And I disagree entirely. And just like DaVita with American Diabetes Association, if you look at the history of the American Heart Association, they received a large grant early on from Procter & Gamble, who was the early maker of one of the original seed oils called Crisco, and later on canola oil and all these oils. So there are financial ties there. But anyway, these seed oils drive inflammation, oxidation, insulin resistance, and I avoid those also. The problem is they're in almost every junk food. They're in salad dressings, so it's a challenge to root them out. But when you do, wonderful things happen to your health. And the last thing is grains. I just avoid those also, even whole grains.
You have a diet. It's got, we'll call it at least a mid, if not high carb diet. Not only that, you're getting carbs regularly with these snacks. It would be my guess, right? Like there's some carbs coming in. Was the goal in reducing that, was it a weight goal, or was it, hey, I believe these carbs are a problem and I just need to stop the kind of insulin spikes associated with these carbs? What was that thing that was like, oh, let me first cut out these carbs and then also start adjusting the time frames that I eat?
Yeah, it's fascinating. The carbs, literally the spiking of the glucose is what drives insulin resistance. And insulin resistance, the body like slowing down its response to insulin, is what type 2 diabetes is. Then you have to take more and more insulin to get the body to respond. So I knew spiking the carbs was driving my pre-diabetes. But as I researched more, I realized that these so-called low-carb diets, which is what this is, you basically keep protein constant, you lower the carbs, you increase the fat. So these low-carb diets have an interesting effect. As people who start a low-carb diet, one of the side effects, the short-term side effects, is some people get dizzy and or lightheaded. And the reason is because their blood pressure drops. And most people, or up to half people, have chronic hypertension. And when they go on a low-carb diet, their blood pressure will go down. And if they're not used to it, lightheadedness can be an early sign of it. It goes away, but I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. So I was thinking of the hypertension too. And indeed, that was one of the first effects I saw with a low carb diet, is not only did my glucose regulation improve, but my hypertension improved almost immediately, to the point that I had to cut back on the medicines because I was getting lightheaded. They were lowering my blood pressure too much because I was doing it already naturally with a low carb diet.
So the original goal was to let's manage. I think I'm getting these insulin spikes. Let's manage those insulin spikes. It wasn't really a weight goal. What was your workout regimen?
Weight, yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. I had a dad bod, but it was not. I was not obese. I don't think I was even overweight with my BMI. But so
you're pretty tall, right?
Yeah, I'm like 6'5". Yeah.
Yeah.
So
really tall.
Yeah. So it was an obesity thing, and certainly obesity can contribute to all these things, and that's the first place to go when you have hypertension, lose weight, all that. But for me, that wasn't really it. But that illustrates an important thing. You don't have to be fat to be unhealthy. Thin people can be unhealthy too, can be metabolically unhealthy. And indeed, if 80% of adults are metabolically unhealthy and only 50% are obese and overweight, then there's 30% that are thin and metabolically unhealthy. So weight wasn't really an issue for me.
And so you said that you came off of your or at least reduced the dose of your hypertension medication pretty quickly. Was that within 6 months, 3 months, something like that?
Oh, yeah. Within a couple months, we wanted to make sure it stabilized and would see. And you mentioned forever prescriptions. Well, this is the converse of that. This is something that's now being called deprescribing, which is when you adopt a metabolically healthy lifestyle. Many of the drugs, again, in conjunction with your healthcare provider, don't try this at home without their involvement. But many people can actually lower their doses of the medicines that they're on.
So the hypertension medication was the first one you lowered. When did you over what time frame did you start kind of pulling off of the rest? And for the pre-diabetes, did you get on metformin? Is the classic one? Were you on metformin and did you pull off of that, or talk about this deprescribing process?
Yeah, the metformin, again, with with their help, I went off it. I mean, there are other reasons to go on metformin that we talk about in the book for longevity and even some of the other diabetes drugs like acarbose. But for this purpose, I went off it, and I had good glucose control because I wanted to demonstrate that before I did anything else. And then the dyslipidemia, like most people in America, I was put on a statin to control that, and that took a little bit longer, and then we tapered that down, and we saw improvement there as well. And then the gout was allopurinol was the drug for that, along with colchicine for acute events. Those are the standard gout drugs, and over time, and again, this is a relatively short time, a matter of a few months, was able to get off all of those. And interestingly, just like metformin is a longevity drug, aside from type 2 diabetes, colchicine is now recommended at a low dose for cardiovascular events. And so, there's so much we don't know, and we're still beginning to understand about, the complexities and, of our magical metabolism and our wonderful bodies that we all have.
I think we're going to continue to know more. It's pretty exciting. So you mentioned carbs and you mentioned seed oils. I once read Ben Greenfield said that he would rather eat 1,000 calories of sugar versus 1,000 calories of bad fats, because the sugar he could just burn off relatively quickly, but the bad fats might or would be used as building blocks for your cells, because our cell walls are lipids, and could stick around for months, right? Because those cells, some of it, depending on what cells they got incorporated into. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree totally with Ben on that. The glucose toxicity, the harm that carbohydrates do, starches and refined carbohydrates and sugars are pretty much immediately. They spike the blood glucose. They cause a damage called glycation, which is measured with a hemoglobin A1C, which is a test your audience may be familiar with, that measures literally sugar damage to red blood cells. And it doesn't just happen to red blood cells, it happens throughout the body. But that damage occurs almost immediately after consuming sugar. And then sugar, because of its harm, the glucose, high levels of glucose, our body has defenses to move them out to minimize this harm. Insulin and other factors move them out of our bloodstream, so they don't persist and they go away. And so the effects of removing carbohydrates from your diet, you can see it almost immediately. People can notice it in 24 to 48 hours if they cut out sugar and they go, "Wow, I've never felt better. This is great." And there may be some transitions, to that, and some rough spots, but the effects are very short term. And then to your point, as Ben said, these seed oils are really tricky because people don't put seed oils in food because they taste good or anything like that. They're basically an inexpensive replacement for more expensive or more volatile oils. Seed oils are basically paid for by the federal government. They're subsidized, so they're artificially low in price. Corn oil. Corn is one of our subsidized crops, just like high fructose corn syrup is inexpensive. It's cheaper than cane sugar, because it's subsidized by the government. The government underwrites all these things. They make the money back into healthcare, 10 years later when everyone comes in with these metabolic diseases. But I'm being sarcastic there. But the point is, these things are inexpensive. So seed oils are just replacing other things. So it's not like they taste better or taste worse necessarily. Whereas sugar, you notice a different taste when you whether or not you have sugar. But so the seed oils, as you mentioned, they have a different pathway. These fatty acids are integrated literally into our body fat, into our cell membranes, and they can persist for months or years. So after you stop seed oils, you're not going to feel it in a week or even 2 weeks. It's a much longer time window there to get the effects out.
So I think we both subscribe to that. Like, if you were forced at gunpoint, which is really what it should take to have 1,000 calories of sugar or 1,000 calories of seed oil, go for the sugar and then go for a run right away, right? Because that could help. Now, one of the points that you make is that a calorie is not a calorie, right? And that with insulin, with elevated insulin levels, you'll end up storing fat, right? And I understand this, but I've been hearing this, frankly, for at least 2 years, but I still do come back to. I don't know if you've heard of Mark Hubb. He's from Kansas State University. He went on a so-called junk food diet, consuming mostly junk food. And in the videos, right? So I don't even think this resulted in a peer-reviewed published paper. So let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that at face value, right? Or maybe you would just look at it in this and say, okay, well, here's where it can't be true. But he was eating mostly like Twinkies, Nutty Bars, muffins. He was consuming 1,800 calories per day. The usual amount for his size was 2,600. He lost 27 pounds in 10 weeks, lowered cholesterol by 20%, and reduced triglycerides by 39%. So there is how does that sit? Because you're very adamant in your book that it's not a calorie isn't a calorie. I've certainly subscribed to that, but that it is not just the energy equation.
Yeah, a calorie is just a calorie. If the conventional advice, which is still given by my medical schools and the medical establishment, is that obesity is caused by eating too many calories, and if you want to lose weight, exercise more and eat less. Those are the recommendations, and they clearly don't work. Half of people are now overweight or obese, and it goes to the fact that calories are not sufficient to make us fat. We need, as you mentioned, insulin to store the calories. So the secret is the 3 macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrates, don't affect insulin equally. Primarily, the main driver for insulin is carbohydrates. There's a smaller effect with some protein, but it's mainly carbohydrates. So if I eat 200 calories of carbohydrates, like 5 potato chips, my body will be told to store fat. If I eat the same amount of, let's say, hard-boiled eggs, those will go directly to energy for me. So what happens is I can eat 2 hard-boiled eggs and I feel no compunction to eat the rest of the dozen eggs. But if I eat 5 potato chips, for a number of reasons, but partly because that energy is being stored as fat, it's removed, so I'm not actually getting that energy, so I'm still hungry. But carbohydrates actually literally drive hunger, which is why they're important part of junk food. So the idea that it's just the carbohydrates is just the calories, and it doesn't matter what you eat, is a mistake. And the simple solution is if you eat fewer of the things that drive insulin and more of the things that don't, you can eat the same number of calories and essentially lose weight. And that's what we talk about.
Yeah, I've recently shifted. I remember when I was younger, my mom suggesting, "Hey, you should eat some cheese." Although at the time it was highly processed American cheese, but because it will stick to your stomach longer. Like that was her kind of interpretation, and I think it was kind of her awareness of her own experience. Right, you have a Pop-Tart for breakfast, and then you're starving by 10. You have an egg or a good little chunk of cheese, and you're not starving at 10. Right, like you're making it much further. Let me ask one more question, and then we'll get to our wrap-up questions. So you're eating 1 meal a day now, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you have a protein goal, and where does that sit? Because I've really shifted my mindset, just to kind of give you the background of where this question is coming from, that I need to consume a lot more protein to maintain muscle mass, because muscle mass is has a huge value on managing insulin if I were to eat those 1,000 calories of sugar. But the data on muscle mass and longevity, right, fighting sarcopenia, muscle wasting, and living longer is pretty compelling. How does that sit with you? Because I can just tell you, I'm eating 2 times a day, and I'm eating so much protein that I feel like I'm here. And then 3 hours later, I'm like, I got to shove another 9 ounces of protein down. Like literally, I feel like I'm stuffing myself with protein and resistant starches. But I'm not like I'm gaining muscle, and I think that's a really important piece. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, my approach to diet, nutrition, and macronutrients, like I mentioned earlier, is I keep protein the same. And when I go with low carb, it's high fat, and when I go high fat, it's low carb. And those are the dials that I move. I keep the protein the same. I agree with you. It's key to have enough protein that you can maintain muscle mass, and I think part of that is the strength training and stimulating the muscles as well. I mean, when I eat once a day, I don't really count calories because I can eat as much as I want, and frankly, when I eat once a day, everything tastes good if I haven't eaten for 18 hours.
Yeah,
exactly. But muscle mass is important. Sarcopenia in the aging, as you say, is critical. And that's why, when we talk about, like in the book, we talk about longevity drugs like rapamycin, which turns this signaling molecule mTOR from growth phase, hypertrophy, anabolic growth, to repair and autophagy. The question is, you want to keep your muscle mass up in later years. If you're going to live to 120, you want to keep that up, and that's the challenge. And fortunately for rapamycin, it appears that it doesn't induce sarcopenia. The question, if you're a bodybuilder, you may not want to take metformin or rapamycin. But, bodybuilders are optimizing for muscle mass many times, or definition. And, you can optimize for different things. The book, I'm talking about optimizing for longevity, for living a long time. And as we all know, you can optimize for performance, like if you're an NFL athlete or a Tour de France person, and you can win the race or whatever, but that may actually shorten your life overall. Or you can optimize for lifespan, which means maybe you won't win the Tour de France or, some other peak performance event. But we all, we make choices, and we need to be aware of these things as we make our choices about optimizing things.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to look at that these extremely high-performing athletes. I remember the first time that I read anything negative was one of Dr. Stephen Gundry's books, and he was like, yeah, there's data that suggests people who run marathons actually have scars, heart scarring, right? And you're like, well, that sounds terrifying. And then I've run half marathons with my wife. I think we've done 11 at this point. And part of me, I was like, oh, well, am I at risk? And I kind of resolved that I'm probably not at risk because I'm not pushing myself to the limits of what a heart can do. Like that particular data set was probably elite athletes, and what does their heart look like, right? That was my guess. I'm not as inclined to do longer kind of high zone 3, zone 4 cardio, just because my mindset is that breaks down muscle and then you break it, then you build it back up, but you haven't really added stress. You haven't had added strength, and you haven't added muscle mass. You're just rebuilding the muscle that you're tearing apart. I try to do more kind of zone 2 and sprints and things like that. And I think, interestingly, I was a semi-professional soccer player, so I trained pretty hard. And it really is hard to do zone 2 for me. Like my instinct is this is too slow, this is not accomplishing anything, but actually zone 2 can be of value because that's a place where you can get to fat burning and not, deteriorating your muscles, which then have to be replenished. But it's interesting, if I were to shift to one meal a day, I would be concerned about and especially because over the last 4 months, I've consumed a lot more protein and have actually had a noticeable improvement in muscle mass, and that's at 55. I just turned 55, so I think that's not what people typically expect, and so that would be one of my concerns. But yeah, I think there's a lot new to come. Like one of the points you made in your book is as you're getting out of medical school, they're like 50% of the information you just learned is going to be useless and is actually wrong in 3 to 5 years or whatever. And unfortunately, we can't tell you which 50%. I think. Let me ask you one more. How do you think about this? The medical information in 1950 doubled every 50 years, 50 years. The last thing that I read said that medical information is currently doubling every 73 days, which, if that's accurate, means at the end of this year, we're going to have 16 times more medical information than we had at the beginning of the year. How does that sit with you and everything we're learning? And eventually, are we going to be able to sift through all of these ideas and get to like this, hey, this is exactly what you need to do to be healthy? Because a lot of people out there are like, I was supposed to be high carb. Now I'm not supposed to eat carbs. I was supposed to eat every 2 hours. Now I'm supposed to eat once a day. Like, these are really kind of big swings.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, certainly medical information is exploding. I mean, longevity and all the chronic diseases, we understand them so much better now than we did just a few years ago, and the rate of knowledge is increasing. I guess the question is how you determine information, and if it's the number of scientific papers published, which is what I think this is, it certainly indicates there's more information. Whether it's exactly that number, I mean, there's a lot of duplication in scientific publications and all, but no question our knowledge is accelerating, and it is a challenge to assimilate and digest that information. We're talking about generalization. The endocrinologist can't read all the endocrine papers that come out all the time, much less the gout papers, and that's why the Alzheimer's doctor may not know about the gout association or the diabetes and the metabolic things, and it's a challenge. I'm optimistic and hopeful about AI, and I think like so many other people, I think it's going to play a role here, and hopefully that will help us. But we're really in unprecedented times with the amount of medical knowledge that's becoming available. And again, especially I mentioned longevity, the last chapter of the book's about that, and how this all, if we decrease these chronic diseases, we're all going to be living a lot longer. And this is really an exciting time for everyone, I think.
All right, let's get into our wrap-up questions. This can be kind of rapid fire. The first one is, do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Yes.
And what is, Dr. Lufkin, what is that target age?
Well, I think human beings, right now, the longest they've lived is, 120, thereabouts, with documentation. I think that's possible with these longevity, with these lifestyle changes. Beyond that, I also think it's possible it's going to require partial epigenetic programming stem cells, maybe other things we haven't thought of, but more aggressive biohacking. But I'll start with the 120. And then let's talk again.
Yeah. If medical information, and you make a great point, maybe it's duplicating, not actually doubling every 73 days. But if that's true, then we really need to have this conversation, maybe even in 12 months, but certainly in 24 months. All right, so we put down 120. You kind of hinted at this, but how long do you think humans can live?
Well, I think we have evidence they can live to 120, under the right conditions. It's an open question how we can go beyond that. But if we start changing stem cells, if we start, changing at a basic biological level, I think we can live longer than that. And the question is, how long? I don't know. I think, you and I were raised when we were taught to fear population explosion, the overpopulation, and who would have thought today that now we're facing population collapse where fertility and birth rates are dropping. And so with fewer young people coming along, letting the rest of the people live longer is a way to, it's not a solution, but it's a way to offset that. And hopefully with greater age will come greater wisdom in some of these people.
I volunteer for that group, by the way. If there's
Me too.
a volunteer program, I'm very much interested.
Sign me
in
up.
That. What 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span would you share?
Specifically about mindset?
Well, no, so protocols, habits, or mindsets that you might share related to longevity and a long health span.
Well, I mean, one thing with mindset and longevity, I think you ask people used to, live to age 60, 65, they would retire and then they would die in 5 years. That was the model. And then now you go to these people and you say, hey, how would you like to live another 40 years? And they go, wow, what am I going to do with my retirement? I'm going to play golf and I'm going to hang around with my grandkids. And they go, wow, do I really want to do that for another 40 years? And they're going, well, but I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Instead of taking that approach, think of what happened between age 20 and 60, or those 40 years, how you changed, how we all changed as individuals, how we grow, how we assimilated life lessons, how we developed as human beings. And then if you take that on starting at age 60 to 100 and you continue to grow and you reinvent yourself, new chapters of your life, new things, I think that is the possibility. And when you think about that, then suddenly, hey, no judgment of golf or grandkids, but you can do that too. But this gives you kind of a new lease on life, and it gives us wisdom from the elders that we sorely need today. So that's a big one. Diet, nutrition. I would just do that right away. That's the other thing. And then I wouldn't overlook toxins in the environment. If you do everything else and you're missing out on lead or mold or mercury or Lyme disease, that can derail the train. So it's really a comprehensive look at all of our environmental lifestyle factors.
All right, so we've got change mindset, kind of thinking about longevity, nutrition, and detoxing. I think that's great. What are 1 to 2 things people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
Looking at it as, like I just said, the first thing would be just extending, another 40 years on the golf course.
Yeah.
It's not that. You're going to be a different person in 40 years, just like you were a different person from you were when 20. So I think that's the one. The other thing I think people get wrong on lifestyle is for many years until very recently, if you talked about longevity, you were a kook. If you were at an academic institution, longevity wasn't a proper study of science. In the last 10 years, we've now seen that we can reliably, consistently increase the lifespan of model animals all the way from yeast to mammals through interventions with a number of things that consistently have significant improvements in lifespan. And I think it's very realistic to think we can do the same thing with human beings. And some people are not aware of this yet.
Excellent. Dr. Lufkin, how can people contact you?
The best way is my website, robertlufkinmd.com, and I have links to social media. My book is there. You can download a sample chapter for free if you want to check it out and see if you like the writing style and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm active on social media there. The links are there. Follow me, say hi, whatever.
Excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Wow, I think every day I can't wait to see the breakthroughs that are happening in longevity and by extension all these chronic diseases. I mean, every day there's new things being developed that we didn't think possible. And the most exciting thing, like so many things in the future, are the unexpected things that we didn't even see coming, I'm hopeful for all of these things. I think, we live in amazing times. The future is bright, and the best is yet to come.
Excellent. So the book is Lies I Taught in Medical School: How Conventional Medicine is Making You Sicker and What You Can Do to Save Your Life. You can find that on Amazon, right? He's one of Amazon bestseller, right? Like of all categories. Is that correct? Like as of today?
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
Thank
That
you.
is so cool. And then his website is Robert Lufkin. Last name is Lufkin, MD. So Robert Lufkin, MD, as in medical doctor.com. He's got a sample chapter over there. You don't even need to listen to the sample chapter. I've listened to the whole book. I tend to listen, not read. The book is absolutely awesome. Go get it on Amazon or go get it at robertlufkinmd.com. Dr. Lufkin, thank you so much for joining us today.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.